pushki, pushki, pi, pushki, pushki, pushki.
Hello and welcome into another reality check here on Talkin' Jets. It's Thursday, 3 o'clock. What's going on? Matt O'Leary with my good buddy, Jets Chaos. Jeremy, how are you today, my friend?
Good, I'm good. It's good to be home. It's good to be settled in. It's good to be alive.
It absolutely is. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get the excited feeling for this Super Bowl. I know it's a matchup that nobody wanted, and we could talk about, oh, it's a repeat, and the Chiefs are always in it, and everyone hates the Eagles. But come on, man. Like, you're a football fan. How could you not be a little amped up that the Super Bowl is coming up this weekend?
Yeah, and it has all the makings to be a great game, too. Like, it's not like a lopsided feeling thing. I think the Eagles have been playing really well. I think they look really, really tough to beat. And Kansas City, they got that quarterback and they got that head coach. And, right away, it just feels like that combination of Reed, Mahomes, you're going to get a good game from them because they're just such a well-coached roster. So, I don't know how people could, I understand that there's no winner for us, that it's villain versus villain, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a fun game to watch. And I love watching games where there's so much at stake, and the emotion and the intensity of it.
I am right there with you. We are going to start today's program by talking about a little news that came out for the New York Jets today. So, as we well know, the 33rd team led the search for the New York Jets to find their new general manager and head coach. And the two guys at the forefront of that were Rick Spielman, longtime NFL GM, and Mike Tannenbaum, who is also a longtime NFL GM with the New York Jets. And it sounds like Rick Spielman will be sticking around. He broke the news today himself on his podcast for CBS Sports. He will be joining the New York Jets as a member of their front office as a senior football advisor. So after all, Jeremy, they do add a senior guy to help out a young first-time GM. And I know that's not like the sexy name. Like, everyone's going to be excited about Aaron Glenn, and believe me, I am excited about Aaron Glenn too. But this excites me in a completely different way. And it's because I finally feel like the Jets are doing something right, where they're rebuilding their front office, which, we saw some news on guys who got let go, who've been here for like 16 years through 3 different GMs. And it finally feels like the Jets are getting some fresh blood in that front office, which is so desperately needed, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the best part about this, and my biggest concern, was you had this rookie GM, this young guy, and Aaron Glenn, and didn't feel like there was anything in between them with Woody Johnson. And he's been, what a terrible thing. Like, in my mind, is there anybody with any experience that is going to tame this owner? Because this owner has had bouts of patience where it was fine, and he's like, it felt good because he wasn't acting too fast. But there's also been lots of news out there and like things we heard, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And some of it has been confirmed that this guy is a little bit out of control, Woody Johnson, and he's done some very questionable things. And I see this, and it makes me feel like maybe this is his admission that he needs somebody, an advisor or somebody to turn to and talk to before he acts. And I'm just hopeful that Rick Spielman could create a little bit of distance between Woody and the everyday operation of the team, as far as personnel, coaching, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think the buffer between Woody Johnson and the GM might be my favorite part of this, because you brought up like there's been numerous reports by The Athletic over the last year or so talking about how much Woody Johnson has been involved. And to his credit, and like, I think we do a good job of trying to be fair and talk through things we like about, a topic and things we could be critical on. I think we've both been pretty critical of Woody Johnson for how he's handled things. But in this specific instance, he has said the right things this offseason. For instance, with the hire of the new GM and the new head coach, he's going to let them decide on Aaron Rodgers, and he's going to stay out of it. And it wasn't like he was pushing, one thing or another on the GM candidates, like you have to do this or you can't do that. And now you get, all right, they're willing to spend the money on hiring this senior advisor type who, maybe he's not in the building every day. I believe I was reading that he's going to be a remote guy, but that's still someone that, one, the young GM who's in the first time in the big chair will have that guy to lean on. And two, Woody could go to this person too. So it's not so much Woody and the GM or Woody and Aaron Glenn butting heads. There's this layer to it.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe if there was a Rick Spielman around, 6 months ago, whatever it was, he, maybe it would have been the buffer we needed for him to say, you know what? Maybe firing our head coach after game 5 is not the best move, especially when the plan is no plan.
Yeah, when there is no plan, it's just flying by the seat of our pants here.
Well, let's just throw away a person, but have, and take the defensive coordinator and say, stay the defensive coordinator and also coach the team and think that that's going to make things better.
Right. And also too, with Douglas, he was very big on him firing or moving on from some guys in the organization. As we know, like Phil Savage obviously stayed around for forever, but there were a lot of guys who, like Chad Alexander, got let go. His other lieutenant that I can't, whose name's escaping me now for some reason, got let go. Rex Hogan, there we go, got let go, and they were never replaced. And the defensive coordinator gets promoted to the head coach, and he's not replaced. He's doing the job of the DC and the head coach, and shockingly, unfortunately, it doesn't go very well. But I think Dante asks a good question here. Do we know the reporting structure yet? So it was reported out of the mouth of Woody Johnson that both the GM and the head coach will be reporting to him. But I would imagine that Rick Spielman's going to be somewhere in the middle there, wouldn't you think?
I would hope so. I mean, I hate that structure. I'm not gonna jump off a bridge over it. I'm not gonna say it's over. We're horrible over it. It's not my preferred structure, in my opinion. Like, I didn't like it when it was Gase and JD, and JD reporting to Woody. I don't like it. I think that a true general manager, is supposed to run the coaching and be the boss of the coaching and the playing personnel. Now, look, if they get along great, if they're like you and me, Matt, if they're like peanut butter and jelly, there won't be any issue. Sure. But what happens if there's a conflict in decision making? Like the GM wants to make a decision and the head coach doesn't want it. And now they're both running to the boss to cry about it or complain. So hopefully Rick Spielman will be the guy in between that and remind them. And I hope that regardless of the reporting structure, there's a very defined, clear understanding of roles, meaning the GM chooses the personnel and runs the scouting department and all that. The coach runs the team on the field and who he's going to play and what he's going to do on game day and run camp. And they're going to understand each other's roles and then work well together, where the coach can talk to the GM and say, in our system and the schemes and what we want to do, these are the type of players we need. And that would be very nice and cohesive, and it could work fine. I prefer more of a hierarchy where there's one person, though, in charge. But I think that in order for this configuration to work, there has to be a very defined understanding of roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was just looking at Rick Spielman and how long he was with Minnesota. It was a really long time. In 2006, he was the VP of player personnel and the de facto general manager. Officially got just the GM title in 2012, and then was the executive VP and general manager from 2014 through 2021. And he finished with a winning record. They made the playoffs 6 times over his span. The furthest they went was to conference final, the conference championship game. They went to the NFC championship game 2 times under his watch. And, they had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10+ win seasons. That sounds pretty nice. I would sign up for that right now, as the Jets currently have the longest active playoff drought over the last 15 or 14 years. I think it's I'm going back to what I said at the beginning, but I think it's a wise decision to have someone who's been in that chair before. And he said it himself, like, Glenn and Muji are going to have the final say on things, and he's only going to be there as an advisor, which I think is fine. Like, just like the offensive or defensive staff, you have the veterans and Steve Wilkes, who's been there and done things before. I think it's an important part.
No, absolutely. As long, again, define roles, no problem. Have a guy to bounce things off to. As far as the Vikings performance, on top of those playoff performances, a lot of us that really pay attention know that a lot of the Vikings playoff runs ended were these heartbreaking things that really had no. It wasn't like the shortage of the GM's ability to give them talent, like the horrible field goals, the misses, like they've had tragic endings to their playoff runs. But it feels like Spielman definitely put the personnel in place for Minnesota to not only be in the playoffs, but win playoff games. And that's sure a hell of a lot better than it feels like we've had in a really long time.
It absolutely does. Just want to go through some of the comments now. Big JT says, "Hey fellas, off topic questions, but do either of you know if that worthless sack of shit Nathaniel Hackett has been officially fired or just stripped of his official title as OC?" That's very funny. And I know that they haven't come out and, like, you didn't get the Nathaniel Hackett fired tweet, but if you look on the Jets coaches, the only people that are listed as assistant coaches are Sean Jefferson, Walter Kusmarek, Junior Taylor, and Nathaniel Willingham. So Nathaniel Hackett is not listed on the coaching roster. So
yeah, I don't think they ever formally announced it as news. I mean, maybe to save him the embarrassment in the public, of it. Like, so they did it. It was just very, very quiet. Like, let's just start listing our coaches. And I think that we could rest assured that we won't be seeing any more of Hackett. And maybe the reason why they haven't made a formal announcement about it is because they haven't worked everything out with Aaron Rodgers. And as terrifying as it is to say, maybe there is something pending on that. But the fact that the Jets actually hired a quarterbacks coach, makes me, which would be the only position they would even dare bring him back if it was because they were bringing back Rodgers. I think we're safe to say that Hackett is gone.
I think that's more than a safe assumption at this point. Swamp Rangers here with the super chat. Thanks for hanging with us. Says, "This is a great move. Fire all the losers and bring in winners. All the water boys and social media nerds should be next." Jeremy, are you putting an axe to the water boys and social media nerds?
I don't. It depends on who. I don't even know what that means completely. I mean, am I a social media nerd? I don't know. I don't want to put an end to myself, but I have no idea because I have to understand the definition of that. But I think it's a great move because I feel like going with a 39-year-old and then the only person above him is Woody Johnson is a really scary thing.
It is a really scary thing, and this adds a little bit of a buffer, which I think is important, as we've hit on. I don't want too many guys to go, because then we start to lose some of our loose connections in there. We don't have to name any names, but I like to have some guys on the inside that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't care so much about the scouts. Like I don't know that it's so important to go and fire scouts like without looking at their performance, right? Like, because there's a whole bunch of them, and even the moves you don't like just the draft picks you don't like, might have nothing to do with that scout, right? They had literally nothing to do with it. And then there might be one specific scout, which was the guy who really pushed Joe Tippmann over Schmitz, like for the Giants, which was a great thing, right? So like we don't know, like maybe there's a scout with a track record of when you read their reports, they were doing great work and frustrated with what the other things that we were doing, but the moves that they really pushed for were the good moves, the moves that we were happy with. What if there's one scout who was the guy who convinced them, Garrett Wilson or whatever, whoever you like, Joe Tippmann, and like and kind of own those really good moves, and then there's another scout that really pushed hard for I don't know what's Elijah Moore. That's like, let's get that guy out of here.
Yeah, it depends, right? It totally depends on which way you're going with it. Daniel says we should temper our expectations because he was a disaster in Miami. He was fired after 1 year as the general manager in 2004.
In 2004,
I was gonna say that
1 year.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's God's greatest gift on this earth, but I think in the role that he's in, which is an advisory role, after what he was able to do for Washington last year, how he helped the Jets through this process, what he's able to do in Minnesota for the 17 years he was there after his stop in Miami, I think that's what I'm looking at. It doesn't really. He was a player personnel guy in the early 2000s, and then the GM for a year.
Well, how are you to judge 1 year as a rookie GM in Miami? 1 year. GM needs more than 1 year. How much of the roster and what he did? I don't know what he did wrong. I don't know. Maybe, they didn't like his personality, whatever it is. How could you measure 1 year in Miami in 21 years ago versus years in Minnesota?
His first round pick, Vernon Carey, was their right tackle for like 7 years. So his next pick was in the 4th round. He had a first round pick, no second, no third. But his first round pick was the starting right tackle for.
That means we don't even know the circumstances of his firing. It may have just been he was a 1 year bridge, and they found someone they really like with experience. We don't even know the circumstances. I mean, to sit there and say it was a disaster. How is it a disaster? You're going to blame him if he just took over the job. You can't hold him accountable for the Miami Dolphins that season. It's like he didn't have time to build and mold his own roster. It's 1 year. Like, so that to me makes no sense. Minnesota, he was there for years. So by the time he was with Minnesota for 2 years, whatever your timeline is of how long you think it really becomes that GM's roster, Minnesota was his roster. And it was a playoff team. And I think that overrides 1 year in Miami 21 years ago.
Yeah, and what they did, they went to Nick Saban after that in 2005, and he was there for 2 years. So Saban obviously had a lot of control with the Dolphins when he was there. So they went the high profile route after that. So I get his point. Like, obviously he's Daniel's a Dolphins fan, so he's bringing it from the Dolphins perspective.
One thing I noticed about Dolphin fans is, other than Don Shula and Dan Marino, everybody that's ever left that organization, they hate. like anytime you talk or mention anyone that's ever touched the Miami Dolphins that's not named Shula or Marino, any Miami Dolphin fan will give you a 10-page paper on why that's a terrible person and a terrible hire, which makes me, it sounds very familiar to me as a Jet fan.
True. It does sound very familiar. But that's also important to keep in mind. Brandon saying next we replace Eric Allen with Matt O'Leary. I don't, with all due respect to Eric Allen, I don't want that job. I don't want to be the face of the Jets. Then I got to push out whatever narrative they want me to. We hate what Eric Allen's job is. You don't hate Eric Allen specifically. Like, I can't go on there and rip Woody Johnson or rip whatever guy or move because it's propaganda TV. It's Jets TV.
Yeah, I mean, it depends if you might want that job because of the way it pays, but I might take it, but I don't know that I would be completely happy with like what you're saying with being the handcuffs. I think one of the things we really love about what we do as YouTube content providers is we can say or do whatever we want, really, and have our own narratives and not have to worry about anybody firing us.
100%. That's the good thing. Our guy Dano says, question, Would you agree that whether we like this isolated move or not, that at least we put another layer between Woody and personnel decisions? We ought to hang our hats on that fact, in my opinion. That's exactly, I think, how Jeremy and I have felt on this one. And something we've brought up, it adds a buffer zone between from the owner and the general manager. And we discussed at length that he needs to stay away from the football operations, and maybe, fingers crossed, we won't know until you actually get there, but maybe this is the first step of him doing that.
Yeah, look, I agree 100% that, and what Dano said there completely, what I love about it is it completely counteracts the incredible negativity of our fan base, of some of our fan base, right? We have this portion of our fan base that's just everything is bad. Everything we do is wrong. Everything we do is look from the worst possible point of view. And I think what Dano is saying is, and it makes sense, it's like, can't you just be happy that this owner is putting somebody kind of in between a little bit, creating, some other person to talk to between his direct self with a new GM. And I think that we have to be happy about that, because to have a 39-year-old rookie GM, who's his mentor? Who's his advisor? Woody Johnson? Like, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
So a completely unqualified old guy who's done nothing but fail for years, at this particular thing, like, no, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, no matter what, we could sit here and argue all day about Rick Spielman's credentials, but just to have somebody there that's older and mature and had been around the game, maybe even if it's just to say, like I said 8 months ago or 6 months ago, whenever it was, hey, Woody, maybe we shouldn't fire the coach right now. Maybe I understand you were upset about what happened in London. You were embarrassed in front of your friends. Maybe that's not grounds to fire a person in the middle of the season.
Taylor chimes in with a good point. I think Spielman is the architect of the AG and 𝐒𝐿 partnership. Now he gets to spearhead or shepherd them into their rookie years. Their success reflects on him and his business. I think that's a good point too, right? Like, he obviously had the relationship with both of those guys, and now he's going to be able to hopefully, because we won't know until you're actually in it, put them in a spot to succeed. That's the goal, at least.
Yeah, I think that the business that he's in, there's no question. Like, if you ever had a question, like, like different positions of, this guy doesn't care, he's just there for a paycheck or whatever it is. No, this guy is in the business of, and I think it's true for a lot of the positions in the NFL, but this is clearly a position for him of, if things go awry and things fail, that really hurts his future of being brought in from other teams, using his firm, right? I mean, it's like the Washington thing was a great thing for them, for these group of former GMs, but you're only as good as your last job in this business, right? Yep. So there's no question, his blood is in this game. Like, you want to talk about skin in the game, he's got blood in the game. This is him. Like, if this doesn't turn around and good things don't happen, this is then he becomes, his name becomes mud.
You're exactly right. Nose Kills chimes in with a super chat. We appreciate the support from our guy. Nose Kills says, heating up the sauna and listening to you guys every Thursday. Life's good. I love that for you, Nose Kills. Very jealous. I don't know what our expectations are for the next season. Kind of refreshing. Look, the Jets very well could be in a transition year next year, because we have no idea what they're going to end up doing at quarterback. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit, because I feel like it fills in with this question. Aaron Rodgers spoke this week about his Jets future and said that he talked with the Jets and they're going to make a decision together, kind of. And we saw what AG said at his opening press conference. There's a chance he comes back and plays, and maybe that changes our expectations. But also there's a point where maybe that's not the case. And maybe, the Jets have to go a different direction in that spot, and that changes things. Where do you stand right now on what you think is going to happen with the New York Jets and how that changes expectations.
Well, I would say that the move we make with Rodgers really speaks a lot about the philosophy of what we're doing in the near future. If Aaron Rodgers is let go based on the decision of the Jets, what that tells us is we are thinking more holistically. We're not just looking at win as many games as you can next year at all costs. We are thinking more about the future also. It doesn't, because I don't want people to think it means we're just saying lose.
No.
But what it means is we're balancing that with a lot more of, we want to clean the financial, the cap space for 26. We want to build something here, and we're realistically thinking this is going to take time. Like, this is the obvious mindset if you let Rodgers go, because I think no matter how you feel about Rodgers, we all know that physically as a player, his statistics, his play on the field is our best option to win games. Right? We right now don't have a better answer than that. He's the best available quarterback realistically for the New York Jets in 2025. Now, if we go with him, we are then taking a hit on where we know we're taking a hit. We're taking a real hit in 2026, right? There's going to be some pain there, which is he moves on, and then we're left with some cap pain and some struggles there in the future, and then worrying about it then. So I think that we gain an understanding of the philosophy based on which one we do, because one is thinking more about the future and, the whole thing overall. And one is thinking about our goal is each year, or specifically this year, we really want to win as many games as we can. And we're going to create pain for ourselves in the future to do so.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think we get a decision by the end of the month. On the 27th, which is 3 weeks from today, is the start of the NFL Combine. So we'll be on during the first day of the NFL Combine, and I think we might have our answer by then on whether or not he is the quarterback or not for this football team.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'll be JV Free saying you could do both, which is true. If you,
I think I said that.
Yeah,
I think I said we could be bringing him back, and to an extent, be still thinking about the future. But I think we're definitely making a compromise on the future. And if we don't bring him back, we definitely could still be trying to win as many games as we can. But I think there's a little bit of philosophical difference there in what we do.
It is a little bit of a philosophy difference at that point. And look, if he does come back, I think we both agree that it needs to be on some sort of reworked contract, so you don't take on that massive hit in 2026, or as big as what it's projected to be right now. And he's also got to sign up and want to be a part of the Tanner Engstrand offense, I think, and lean into a little bit more of these new philosophies. So again, there's a lot to this decision. I don't think it's so black and white to just say, the only option is for him to come back. That's all that they could do. Or there's no possible way you can bring him back. I think you can make reasonable cases on both sides of the aisle, and we'll see.
Absolutely. It's just, it depends on, again, it comes down to philosophy, because it's like if they decide, one person might argue, we're not winning the Super Bowl, and that's our goal. So let's do what's best in a little bit longer term future to win the Super Bowl. And that doesn't mean that side's the only right side. I'm just saying that's one example. The other side is we haven't made the playoffs in 14 years, and we really need to change the culture of the locker room. And yeah, there's some compromise of the future, but we need to get some winning going on. And we believe, if they believe it, that Aaron Rodgers gives us the best chance to do that. That's a philosophy that you can get behind too, changing the culture and teaching these young players what it's like to win rather than have another year of losing under their belts.
Right. And who knows, maybe, AG wants to come in and have success right away. I know it didn't end well, obviously, but it felt like that's what Mike Maccagnan was trying to do when he first got to the Jets. They had those veterans, and they had, they were, if I'm trying to think of the right word to use, the not successful retool, but like retooling on the fly almost, or rebuilding on the fly, where you're successful in year one, and then try to maintain that through your rebuild. It's going to just depend on what their philosophy is. And neither one of Darren 𝐒𝐲 or AG has really come out and said, this is or isn't our philosophy. And the only way we're going to know is when the decision's actually made on what they're doing with Rodgers, I think personally.
Right. And there's a third variable, right? There's the variable of whether they keep him or not. Like, let's say they didn't keep him. There could be the explanation of, no, you're wrong. We do think we could win the Super Bowl. Like we think that we're better without him. There is that possibility too. There is the possibility of, I don't agree with you, Jets Chaos. I don't think that Aaron Rodgers is the best person to be there to win games. And there might be people who have a better idea. And some of it might not be based on just on-field ability. Some of it might be based on, we think that he's going to make it difficult to change the culture of the locker room, which is a valid concern.
So this week we saw Thomas Dimitroff on a few different shows at Radio Roast, one with Jake Asman as well, Jets content guy who's down there for the Super Bowl. And he made it pretty clear, and not just Jake's interview, but in multiple, he was saying that his plan was to move on from Aaron Rodgers. And clearly he didn't get the job. It went to Darren 𝐒𝐲. But what I've been really curious about is whether he was an outlier and most of the GM candidates were saying, no, if I get this job, I would want to bring back Rodgers and here's my plan. Or if most of the candidates were on his side saying, I would move on from Aaron Rodgers. That's honestly what I'm interested in. I think that'd be cool to know.
Yeah. Or if maybe maybe the right answer was not knowing. Maybe the right answer was, oh no, dare I say it, the Jeff Ulbrich answer of, when I can't, well, if you hire me, I'll come in and I'll take a real hard look. But I could see it being the right answer of saying, well, I haven't spoken to Aaron Rodgers and I don't know his philosophy. I don't know his, where his brain is at and what his beliefs are. And I can't tell you what I would do based on just looking in from the outside. I can only tell you, that I need to talk to him and I need to see if we're aligned, because I think it's important for the head coach to be aligned with the, and the GM to be aligned with the quarterback and what the vision of the future is. So that could be the answer they wanted.
Could be. Valid point from our guy here. Bargerfield says, I didn't understand when Dimitroff said move on from Rodgers, but then said Rodgers would be a good or great transitionary quarterback. Isn't that what the Jets want? It did kind of feel like he was talking out of both sides of his mouth with that one. My interpretation was maybe he didn't want to come across like he was throwing Aaron Rodgers under the bus and being like, this guy sucks, I don't want him. But I don't know. I think that's a fair criticism of his answer, because he was saying, you move on, he could go somewhere else and compete and maybe bring on or bring along a young, talented quarterback that you take and have him sit behind it. So in theory, I get why people are saying that he could have just said he could do that here for us and we draft someone in the mid rounds and develop them that way. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think that he didn't get the job, so it's hard to, whatever he says afterwards, it's much easier to be very decisive and you have an opinion or go to, I don't know. I don't know why he would even say it. I don't know why he would even be public about it so much, because he didn't get the job, so it's kind of irrelevant. But maybe he was just asked the question and he was just saying what he said and what he would do. But I don't know. I don't think it really matters much because he didn't get hired. So, and it might not have been relevant to that at all. Like, the reason he didn't get hired might have had nothing to do with him saying that he'd move on from Aaron Rodgers.
I wanted to transition in the second half of the show and get into another topic that has been batted around on Jets Twitter and amongst the community, is the reaction to some of these positional coaches. So we knew that the New York Jets were bringing in Tanner Engstrand to be the offensive coordinator. But what do you make of the reaction to the Scott Turner hire and the quarterback coach hire?
The reaction to the quarterback coach hire was hysterical to me. And it goes on to, how many people do we hold accountable for the performance of a player? or a group of players. Like, it's amazing to me. And sometimes the reaction wasn't even right. Like, people were saying, the quarterback, first of all, like last year he was with Seattle. Geno Smith had one of his best years of his career last year. So, and then when he was with Levis, the year he was with Levis, and when he first started playing his rookie games versus when he was not there, Levis was a better quarterback with him there. Yet, because it's the name Levis and people consider that in their minds a bust or don't like him, he's a terrible quarterback coach. Then you have the people who say, well, he's been fired from 3 different jobs in a row or something like that, which could be a concern and could be very valid. But you can also argue he's been hired 3 years in a row. So, I mean, like, which is a positive, right? Because people definitely hire him. And we don't know the conditions of his firing, even if his quarterbacks, whether they played poorly or they played really well. Again, everybody associated with a quarterback that plays, a rookie quarterback who plays well or not, gets the credit and the blame. Everybody? Like, what if a quarterback coach does a fine job and they're working with the mechanics and that quarterback is definitely, you could see the mechanics are better. You could see them improving and growing, but the team sucks and the offense does terribly anyway because the offensive coordinator sucks or because the offensive line sucks. There's a million things. And it's amazing that we all think we know a person that we never knew the name of 2 days ago, but by Googling his name the moment we hire him, could make a definitive determination of whether or not it's a good hire. I mean, obviously that's what we do, but to be so upset, there were people sitting there saying, this is why the Jets are terrible, and this is why we'll never develop a quarterback. A little over the top.
I do think that kind of reaction is a little over the top. My takeaway is going to be slightly different from yours, but I think it's worthwhile to talk through. My point on the hire of Scott Turner and Charles London, the new quarterback coach, I just thought they were a little bit slightly underwhelming. Not that they aren't qualified for the position, because both have held that title before in different organizations. I just didn't think that either one of them has done like this previous amazing job. Geno is the best quarterback or the most production that he got out of any of his quarterbacks this past year. His turnover numbers were a little bit higher this year than in years gone by for Geno. And, I'm not saying that's a direct reflection of the quarterback coach, but in Atlanta from 21 to 22, that was Matt Ryan's last year, and then into Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota was there, I believe, that year after. In 2023, you had the Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis connection. Tannehill gets hurt and wasn't really playing all that well before the injury, and Will Levis definitely looked better in year 1 than year 2. I'll give you that. And then Geno was his most recent stop. So there's not anything where it's like, oh, he was with this quarterback and they were like elite. The best one was Geno, where he was like, okay, somewhere around the middle of the pack. And then for Scott Turner, he does have offensive coordinator experience, and his best year was 2019 in Carolina, when I believe, was that the Teddy Bridgewater year? No, it was Kyle Allen started 12 games for them. And I thought they actually did okay. But then in Washington, things didn't go great from 2020 to 22. And then he had another stop with Vegas as the pass game coordinator and the interim offensive coordinator. And I didn't think he did a great job there either. But quarterbacks that you're working with does matter, I think, in this combo.
Sure. And the other thing you have to look at is the pool of candidates when you're doing positional coaching, because when you're hiring position coaches and you say, I want experienced guys, what you're saying is, I want somebody that's unemployed. Sure. Because they're not going to do a lateral move, right? So you're either taking a coach you never heard of that's a first-time coach, like as a quarterback coach, or you're taking somebody who's unemployed, which means there's some kind of reason for that. So you do also have to look at the pool of available candidates. It's like, give me the candidate that could have been hired as our quarterback coach that you wanted. And we could talk and say, oh yeah, maybe they should have done that. And maybe we could agree or disagree. But it's another thing to consider is who for these positions, what were the pool of candidates?
Yeah, the guy that they were really interested in was David Blau, but the Washington Commanders actually vetoed him being able to interview for that position.
Right.
So they kind of had to pivot to what would have been their second option.
Well, I think if there's anything, if there's a good thing typically is consistency. And you know what we were really consistent about this offseason? It feels like we got our second choice in every at every level. It feels like every level is our second choice. And let me tell you something. When you consider the fiasco that is the New York Jets, when you consider the Woody Johnson, same thing, the terrible media on Woody Johnson, and the fears of when we went into this, like who's going to want to come to play for the Jets. If we honestly got our second choice down the board from A to Z, that's pretty good for a team that is pretty much a shit show.
That's true. You're not wrong to bring that up. I just wanted to be honest with my takeaway on it too. Like I want it to be fair. I like the Aaron Glenn hire a lot, and I'm excited about a lot of things that the Jets have done this offseason. But I also don't want to be the guy who's going to be like, oh, like this, like everything is great. And this is an amazing and fantastic hire. I just looked at both of those and we're like, it's okay. It doesn't really move me a lot. I guess it's not horrible. I'm not going, oh my God, I can't believe they just hired this guy who has zero coaching experience or has failed miserably everywhere he's gone. I just think they've both been okay to mediocre with where they've been so far.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and I don't want to dispel or like sit there and not respect every job and that say there's no importance to any job. But if the only way we could be a great football team or this could work out is if every single coach from the head coach down to the position coaches have to be the best or have to be great, I think we're in for a really like another 50 years of not, if that's what it takes, because I just don't see how we could sit there and again, and that has to do with not being unhappy or happy with a hire, but I'm talking specifically to the people who are jumping off bridges and saying basically that it's over, basically saying this is over. Like this organization sucks. This is terrible. Another 3 to 4 years of losing literally after hiring a position coach.
No,
like for me, it's a little over the top.
Very, very over the top. Tigo's hanging with us. What's up, Tigo? How do you guys feel about the Jets being on the forefront of NFL scouting and evaluation with using Madden ratings for trades and free agent signings? I don't know if you saw that today. The Ravens also mentioned that down at the Super Bowl. So they were on the cutting edge. Maybe we should have leaned into this Brick Johnson thing.
People will steal information from anything if it's and not like if you're making decisions on it. I mean, obviously that's a joke and it's terrible. But think about it. Every time when you go into an evaluation process, even Tom C, I'm sure would tell you when he has to evaluate, when he goes through the guards, right? College 2025, I'm going to look at all the guards. He has to start somewhere. He has to look at some form of ranking where they are just to get the names to start his own ranking. Now, Dom C doesn't, and this year especially proved it with Miles Frazier, he doesn't allow, and he's getting better, he even said this, allow their rankings to affect his rankings. He does it by his eyes because it's his list, right? I mean, if they're using Madden to get the list of players, but then honestly looking and evaluating every player the appropriate way and creating their own ranking, I mean, it's silly because there's a million other lists they can do to get the list of top players. But it really is not as bad, or it doesn't matter as much as if they are literally making decisions based on Madden numbers. That would be, I mean, you'd hope the owner would quickly fire who's ever doing that, but it's harder to, like that's crazy. But at the end of the day, the people making those numbers initially are people who are probably familiar with the players to some level and have done some analysis just to take the names as a guide. Like, oh, look at these are the 40 guys, the top guys that Madden rated, probably would coincide with ESPN's ranking of the top 40. Like, I bet you there'd be tons of overlap anyway. The important thing is that every team has their own evaluators that are prospecting and looking and watching film. I think at the end of the day, that's what matters, and that's what should be driving your decisions.
Exactly that. Joe wants to chime in and ask a question. He says, under the new structure that we have assembled, who do you think has final say on personnel and draft picks? I think Glenn does. I think this is really Aaron Glenn's show, and that 𝐒𝐿𝐺𝐻's going to be here to assist. But with how they've structured things, I think Glenn has a lot more power than, let's say, Robert Saleh just had when he was the head coach.
I think it might be like, and depending on the round and the situation, it might be a positional thing too, like that, where Glenn is more the position and the type of player, and it's the personnel and 𝐒𝐿𝐺's job with, with the scouts and everything to get him that player, right? To say, I need a safety that's a turnover machine, that's more of a free safety, great in pass coverage, ball hawk, and then the personnel department finds that player, right? I need a wide receiver I want the tall wide receiver that's physical to complement Garrett Wilson, like whatever they're looking for in their system. And then I don't know that Aaron Glenn did go start as a scout, which is a good thing, but I don't know if I want, I don't think any of us would want one scout who had some experience as a scout making that decision, because what's the point of having an entire personnel decision? So in my mind, it would just be, this is what we need. Right, it's like a chef going to the owner of the restaurant or the manager of the restaurant and saying, in order to make these good dishes, these are the ingredients I need. And then that person goes out and gets the ingredients.
Exactly. So it's Glenn coming up with the thought process or finding out like what it is. Okay, I think I need the X, Y, and Z. And then 𝐒𝐿𝐺𝐻 coming in and going, this is a player who I think fits what you're talking about. Kind of like, I get it right?
I would hope. I mean, like if you look at the defensive coordinator that we hired, for example, the difference between what we've been the last 4 years and these years is obviously edge is always important, but with Saleh and that scheme, it was everything. The defensive line was everything, right? Like, so important. This defense will not work, and we saw that happen. We saw what happened with the Hassan Reddick thing. JJ got hurt. We let our defensive tackles go, and we didn't do a good job of replacing them. The defense fell off a cliff, right? But with Wilkes, it's not exactly the same thing. It's not edges or everything. There's a lot more importance on safeties and secondary, because there's going to be a lot more blitzing, which exposes, and there's a lot more men, right? And not that we never did man coverage, but there's a lot more, put your best cornerback on their best receiver, that kind of thing. When you're doing that, you need better safety play. The safeties suddenly become very important, or more important than in a different system. So I think that has to be taken into consideration by your personnel staff, by when you develop your roster. Like, you have to be aware of this. A great example is Miles Frazier. This is the right guard that we love from LSU. If you're running an outside zone blocking system, you probably, or outside zone scheme, you probably don't want to draft this guy Miles Frazier. He might not be the right guy. He's better for a power gap, right? Because he's a bigger guy. He's a little less athletic. He'll mow you down. He'll pancake people, but you don't want him running around in space. So it absolutely, there has to be input from the coaching staff, the schemes, the kind of team they want to build, and then the personnel department to find it. I think that's the only way it works.
Yeah. And you hope that this new combination is something that would be able to get that right. That would be a nice change. Going through, looking at some more comments in here. And I think there's a fight going back, not a fight, but there's a debate going back and forth about Jackson Dart. And Michael James is saying that Spielman said that he is a huge Dart fan on his podcast. Do you think that is enough to link Jackson Dart to the Jets? I know that's something that's been talked a lot about by fans. Some even, which I don't personally get, thinking that he can go in the first round. I think it's different if you're taking him in the third or fourth round versus top 10 potentially.
Well, I mean, the top 10 would be insane, because you're talking about a project quarterback. I mean, and I know people who love Dart don't want to hear that. But you could sit there and ignore all day that mechanics don't matter, but mechanics matter. And if you have a quarterback that's just mechanically doesn't throw a football correctly, or there's awkwardness, it doesn't mean he's not going to be a great quarterback in the NFL. It doesn't mean he can't be a great quarterback in the NFL. What it means is, though, it takes time to fix that. And Jackson Dart's going to need coaching and time. Now, I could see him still being an end of the first round only because of the position, because I could see a better team that kind of has a quarterback, like imagine like the Rams, right? They got, they're like Stafford for another year or two. You take a Jackson Dart, you develop him. Look at his arm talent. Even in spite of the mechanics, he gets results. Think of how good he could be when we work with this kid. I could see that happening. Top 10, though, to me, when you take a quarterback in the top 10, I would imagine you're hoping for a player who could step in and play. And a lot less dependent on, will we be able to fix his mechanics? Will we be able to work with his legs and his feet and footwork and all that stuff? So I mean, I never complain. I'm never going to jump off a bridge over us taking a mid-round quarterback. But when you look at our roster now and the holes we have in our roster, our first round and our second round pick should not be a quarterback. Yeah, I mean, if you could argue if Ward or Sanders slips to us at 7, whatever, if they love him and they take him, I might not agree, but I live with it because that's the guy they love. But to grab Dart like in the second round with our needs, the amount of roster spot, things we need to fix on our roster, would be terrible for me. Like, I would be so anti that. You get Dart in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round or whatever, I'll shut my mouth and I'll say, okay, maybe that's, the biggest problem I would have with it more than anything is taking a quarterback in this draft, 2025, which is such a weak quarterback draft, and eliminating ourselves from the 2026 quarterback draft, which is where I think real franchise quarterbacks are going to come.
I tend to agree with you. And if you take someone in the 3rd round and you don't see anything from them this year, that doesn't stop you from taking someone in the 2026 first round. But if you're taking Jackson Dart in the top 10, are you then taking another quarterback next year? In all likelihood, probably not.
Right. But that again, welcome Frankie from Fopbush. Great to see him here. Look, I don't agree with taking Sanders, but if he slipped to us and we took him, I mean, I'm not pretending to no, I'm just going to be like any other, like I am when they hired Aaron Glenn. I'm just going to freaking root hard for Sanders and hope to God that the issues I have with his game, the concerns, not really issues, but the concerns I have are going to hope are wrong or for not. I'm going to hope he proves I had no reason to be concerned, obviously. But if they love him, if those scouts love him, they certainly know more than I do. And I will just have to sit there and trust that they took him, if it's for that reason. If they take him because it was position and they just wanted a quarterback and they don't necessarily love him, I'd be, of course, pissed off to no end.
That would be not ideal. I'm curious.
We would never know that, by the way, because if they took him, the messaging to us would be, we love this kid.
Oh, of course. Connor Hughes would be the first one saying that the Jets had him their number 1 player rated on the board, and they couldn't believe he was there at pick 7.
Right, exactly.
T goes back and says, fixing broken mechanics is a near impossible task. These kids have been throwing the way that they throw for 10 plus years. If a kid is mechanically broken, you have to pass on him.
Well, if that's true, then obviously Tigo would never take Jackson Dart, because we were watching it live and you could see it. Like, at first I didn't know much about it. Like, Tom C and Dylan T were sitting there talking about how bad his mechanics were. And I said, what are you talking about? What do I look at? And they said, look at it, throw the ball. Like, look at his legs when he throws the ball. Look at his hips. And I was like, oh my God, like you don't even have to be trained very well to see it. Like, when you throw a football, even all of us as kids, right? You're taught a little bit, point the elbow, step with the foot, step through the throw. There's some basic things that we can all see. We don't have to be trained scouts. And then you watch a guy who's just so awkward, like his body is turned a different way than his legs. And you do have to take your hat off to his arm talent, because I said to Dom first thing, well, how is he making the passes then? Because
it's his arm.
Up. And he says, well, he does have a great arm, obviously. Like, he has a really strong arm because he's able to do it in spite of the bad mechanics.
It's tough to mold those kind of guys. That's where I'm with that on 𝐒𝐿𝐲. And there's very few outlier examples of that. You know, someone who was poor in college mechanically and that are able to improve off of it. And especially too in the first round. Like if you're taking a quarterback prospect in the first round, man, like I don't think you want the term developmental attached to that.
Right. That's the whole point. And the other thing is another thing I challenge people that like dart, and I don't like to be anti-players. I mean, these are great young kids. I don't have any, unless they do something I don't like. I root for kids. I root for our young, right? But can anybody give me an example of a successful NFL quarterback that had, I'm not talking about, oh, this guy didn't have the best mechanics. I'm talking about watch Jackson Dart and then tell me an NFL comp player, a quarterback that was successful in the NFL that looked like that when he threw a football. That was that awkward and that stiff. And I can't think of a successful quarterback that like that. Like once they pointed it out to me and I got to see it live, and then I ran it that night. We literally watched it on tape. We went right into all 22 and found the game. And Dom C was like, any game, just watch him play. And I watched it, and I was like, oh my God, it was like glaring how bad. And then watch like a quarterback, like any quarterback really, like that's not known for bad mechanics. Like watch Sam Darnold throw a football, for example. Right. I don't know if that's the best example, but watch Sam Darnold throw a football, watch the way his body is, watch his footwork, and watch what he looks like when he throws a football. And then watch Jackson Dart when he throws a football. And it doesn't look at all the same. So there's an issue.
Frankie points out the one thought that I had in my mind, saying Josh Allen was horrible mechanically, but fixed it after year 2. That was the outlier that I had thinking in my head. So it's rare that you see it.
Right. And that was that's an argument to 𝐒𝐿𝐲, because I said, clearly if you want to develop a guy and take a chance at developing a guy, just not in the top 10, you don't do that. Right. But Buffalo broke the rules for that. But I want to point out, Josh Allen played his best football after fixing his mechanics. When you have horrible mechanics, the results aren't as good. He had so much arm talent. He wasn't horrible as a rookie. He wasn't terrible, which just speaks to his arm talent.
Yeah, he was a freak. He was, the rushing ability with that big arm was awesome. He just had no accuracy at first because of, as you mentioned, how poor the mechanics are.
And I really hope that no one's going to try to make an argument that Jackson Dart's arm talent is anywhere close to Josh Allen or comparable.
No, it's not. So we've reached the 4:00 hour. So we are finishing up here on our show for today. If you're new, make sure to subscribe, leave a like before you get out of here. We have shows every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. A ton of content going on over on the channel. Make sure to follow along with Jeremy's work and mine as well. That'll do it for us. We will talk to you next week.